So in this tutorial, carrying on from our last one and looking at the basics of Unreal, we're going to bring in some textures for our object. So I'm currently in Substance Painter. I've made this material for our table and really going to look at just exporting this out. I'm not looking at Substance Painter within this tutorial, so these are already created for us. Now what I would do just in Substance Painter is if we just go up to our texture set list, just icon here, and by default this will be called whatever your material was called or your shader was called in Maya or whatever software you bring this in from. So this was a Fong material. I've just changed the name of this by double clicking it and changed this to whatever our object is. This will be the basis, the prefix for our material name, so or a texture name, so it's worth calling this something. So with that done, we can go to File and we can go to Export Textures. And in here we can set our output, we can set our type, our quality, resolution, and everything else. But the main thing I want to look at here is this configuration. So let me just show you this folder here. So I created a textures folder. Remember I did my output before. So this was my exports here, my table, that's my texture. And I've got two different folders here containing the same information really. So within our non-packed, we have separate files for all of the different channels. So we've got our ambient occlusion, our base color, height, which we don't necessarily need for this. It's just outputted that out. But I could delete that or not bother importing that into Substance Painter for this particular object. We have our metallic, our normal, and our roughness. If I go to the other one, our packed, you can see in here we just have three files. So we have our base color, our normal, and then this one, which is our occlusion, our roughness, and our metallic, all within one file. Now the benefits of that, not necessarily a size thing, but just an ordering thing. So basically, rather than having each material or each separate material brought out with all of these different textures to deal with in Unreal, we only have three textures or three separate textures to deal with in Unreal. And that can save hassle down the line. So let's look at how we do this. So in my export options, I've got my configurations. And there's a couple of different options down here, but one of the things we have is this PBR Metal Rough AO, ambient occlusion. And what this has is our normal, if I just choose this actual configuration down here, let's have a look. So we've got this one here. We have our base color, our roughness, metallic, normal, height, and ambient occlusion, all given separate textures. Note that for our base color, we have an RGBA file, so this actually can contain alpha information as well. We have our roughness set to a grayscale because it just contains gray information. We have our metallic, again grayscale information. We have our normal map, which is just a straight RGB. We have our height, which is grayscale, and we have our ambient occlusion, which is also grayscale. Okay, so we have another option, which is our Unreal 4, and we've got a couple of these. Going to our Unreal 4 packed, and yes, that's one. So in here we have our base color, we have our normal, so you see our RGB and our RGBA, same as the other one, and here we have our occlusion, our roughness, and metallic. So this time, instead of being three separate grey channels, we have this in our R, G, and B. So each one of these, the red, the green, and the blue channel, can contain those that grayscale information. So our occlusion, our roughness, and our metallic. So it works the same way, it's just packing it inside one texture. So what you can do is just choose the relevant output. So if I wanted to choose that packed one, I would go down here and choose this Unreal 4 packed, and then we can just click on export. Or I could choose the PBR, ambient occlusion, that one there, and I could export that one as well. Okay, so I just wanted to go through that first of all. So within Unreal, just go into here. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to go to my content again. And again, I'm going to create another folder. It's best to get these things organized. So let's create a new folder. I'm going to call this materials. And actually, I'm going to create yet another folder. call this textures. Okay. So before, when we brought in the static mesh, I went into the folder, right clicked, I went to import to. Another way that we can do this, if I just go into here, let's go into textures for example, is I can actually find my folder, and I'm just going to grab both these two folders here, and I'm going to drag and drop those directly inside that folder. Now the reason it asked for that was because of the folders themselves. So, and let me just make sure I go into. Actually, I've got some similar information here. My base color I've got twice, just because of the way I've brought them in. What I'll do is I'm just going to create some folders. In fact, let me just grab these, just go through this. So I'm just going to right click and delete these for a second. And with this, we can just click delete again. So this time what I'll do is I'll create, let's go back in here. Oh, I did do it. Non-packed, packed. Let's do it this way. So I'm going to go in to my non-packed folder. Make sure I've got these in the right place. Let's grab these. I think it did do it right. But just checking, let's go into my packed folder. Just drag those in. So I've got our 3 files here, and then we have our separate files there. And as I say, I don't really need the height, so I'm just going to delete that within there. So we have these 5 different files. Okay. So now I'm going to go into my materials, and we can create a new material. So to do this, we simply right click, and we can go to material, or we can add new and add a new material like that as well. So let's do it this way. Material. Again, I'm going to give this to the prefix because I'm going to call it M underscore. And let's call this wooden table. And then I'm going to double click onto this to bring up our material editor. So with this open, we need to bring our textures into this. Again, a couple of ways to do this. If I go back to my content browser, and I'll start with a non-packed first. So in here, I'm just going to grab these by just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just by shift clicking on, I'll click on the first one, shift clicking on the last one. And I can actually just drag over, and here I have my material here. If I just drag over, hold the mouse down, and then drag in, I can drag these texture samples into here. Okay, quite a nice, easy way to do it. Another way to do this, if we click on, we've got some shortcuts within here. If I press T and just press left mouse button, we can create a texture sample that way as well. And we can always browse for our material here, so we can bring it in manually. Or similarly, if I have a material selected here, when I press T, it will bring in that currently selected material. Okay, so a couple of different ways we can do that. So all we need to do here is just plug the relevant materials into the relevant channels. So here I have my base color. So we're going to output from, we have our individual outputs. We have our RGB, we have our red, green, blue, and we have our alpha. So I'm going to pull this from the base color. This is our ambient occlusion. If in doubt, you can go down here and you'll see it comes up with a name. So I'm going to output this to my ambient occlusion. Just use the right mouse button here to pan around and our scroll wheel to zoom in and out. Got our normal. This is the roughness. And then here we actually have the metallic. Now this is just, because this isn't metallic at all, this is just black. So we could do this a different way, but I will plug this in. So let's plug that into metallic. And then I can just click on save. And then we can put this onto our table. So let's put this on and let's have a look at our material. Now, there's two ways to do this. I could actually drag, so let's go back to my contents and my materials. So this is our material. I could drag and drop that onto an object straight away. Just press F. So I have our material there. I can do it that way. I could click on an object, and under here we have our materials. And I can either search for material there. So I could search for underscore table. They call it wooden table there. Or another way I could do this is actually similar to what I did before. Click on the material in the content browser, and then here on the materials I can just click on this button here, use selected asset from content browser. That will bring that in. But this is only applying this to one instance of this table. Say we wanted every instance of this table that we brought in to start with this material. The best way to do it is actually to go back into my static meshes, and I'm going to double click on my table in here. Then actually within here I'm going to apply the material. So up here we have our material slots. Let's see if I've got this still selected. No, I haven't. Make sure I go back. Go to my materials, just highlight this, select it, go into my table, and then we can click on Use Selected Asset. And this way, every time we make a version of this table, let me just save this. You can see it now has that material already on there. Okay. Now that can be overridden. If we have another material that we want to apply to this, we can just add that onto there. But the base table will always have that material if we apply it at this level. So that's something just to note. So let's look at this packed texture then. So if I go into my material again, let's open this up. I'm just going to break these connections. We can just alt click over this, or we can just highlight the wire. I thought I could press delete. Just alt click on the wire itself. I'm going to pull these to one side for a second. And what I'm going to do instead is bring in my other textures. So again, let's go to content, let's go to textures, and this time go to the packed. Select these three. Let's drag over and just drag in. Move these down. So again, we can do the same thing. We can click on our base color. We can click in our normal. But then we have these three separate files. So I was saying about the channel outputs before, and that's all we have to do with this. If we just remember the order that these are in, so just back to Substance Painter, let me just go back to our export textures. Let's go back to our configuration and our packed down here. So remember, it's occlusion in the red channel, roughness in the green, metallic in the blue. So in our Unreal, ambient occlusion, so we're going from the red channel into ambient occlusion, going from the green channel into roughness, and blue channel into metallic. So I have those exactly the same texture, just brought out of here. Okay, just save that out. Now we do need to make sure that we have something set up with this material, this packed texture. Let's go back to my contents. I'm just going to double click on this material. So I have it in here. And it looks a bit odd, and that's just because we're seeing all these individual channels at once. If I was to go in and switch these off and look at one by one, so we've got our ambient occlusion, we have our roughness, and we have our metallic in there. And that's the way that we're seeing this, okay? This is just all those layered up. Now what we want to make sure is that in the compression settings for this over here, that we just change this to this masks no sRGB. Otherwise it will cause a problem. This is just giving us an error down here. Let's just make sure to save this. And you're best actually doing this beforehand. So let me go back into my contents. I don't know if this will allow me just to reload it in. Yeah, there we go. So I can just reload that material in now, and that will replace it. Then replace the one before, and that will get rid of the error. So just bear that in mind. So as soon as you're bringing a packed material, double click on it, go into the compression and set that to masks no sRGB, and just save that out. And we do have exactly the same thing now. So again, on my table, I can just click in here. Let's go to my materials. Let's make sure this is saved out actually. So it looks like it is. Yeah, and actually it's updated itself because it was already on there. So if you just look at our table, there we go, just because I hadn't saved it out. So we have exactly the same thing. It's just two different ways of working. So that's with our non-packed or our packed, depending on how you want to work with this. Okay. And that's just applying the materials very basically within Unreal.